The first case of the virus was detected in Wuhan, China on December 31, 2019. The patient experienced symptoms such as the flu and was quarantined while the source of the flu was identified. The next day, the main location of the virus was spread through a seafood market. Since that day, the market operation has been closed. Various measures have been taken to prevent this epidemic from spreading beyond the country of origin and continent. It includes the inspection of foreign tourists coming from Wuhan, China at the airport. The World Health Organization, as known as WHO, has also advised travel and trade restrictions with China. On January 7, the virus that caused this dangerous epidemic was identified as 2019 nCoV. 2 days later, the first death from coronavirus was reported. Since then, the virus has spread to many countries including Malaysia, South Korea, Singapore, and entire continents such as France and Germany. On the 11th of March 2020, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 as a pandemic.
COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
Within less than 48 hours of the first case reported in Singapore, Malaysia reported its first COVID-19 positive case on January 25, 2020. It was detected in Malaysia and traced back to 3 Chinese nationals who previously had close contact with an infected person in Singapore. They had travelled into Malaysia via Singapore on the 24th of January 2020. Malaysia reported its first fatal case on March 17, 2020, which related to the religious gathering in Sri Petaling. Up to April 14, 2020, Malaysia had reported 2 waves of COVID-19 cases, with the first wave ending successfully within less than 2 months. After that, in early March 2020, the second wave occurred with worrying situation. The government of Malaysia enforced a movement control order starting on March 18, 2020 to break the chain of COVID-19. After recording a significant decrease in cases, the government relaxed the movement control order to the conditional movement control order. Since 21st November 2020, the government gradually reimposed relaxed RMCO restrictions for most states. Unfortunately, after the state election of Sabah, the number of infections increased dramatically. The government had to reimpose the movement control order to control the situation. Until now, Malaysia is still struggling to decrease the number of daily cases. Various actions were taken by the government in handling the pandemic that affected various sectors in the country. One of them is the migrant workers. Migrant workers are people who migrated to another country with the intention of working to improve their living standards. They usually do not have the intention to stay permanently in the country or region in which they work. In Malaysia, there are nearly 2 million documented migrant workers. Indonesia contributes the highest number of foreign workers in Malaysia, followed by Myanmar. These workers were employed in 6 sectors of the economy: construction, manufacturing, services, plantation, agriculture and domestic work.
On 3rd June 2020, the government announced the emergence of new COVID-19 cases in several detention centres. These clusters were mainly associated with the lack of physical distancing, the existing poor healthcare system and unhygienic practices in the detention centres. Moreover, dormitory issues among migrant workers are not an uncommon matter nowadays. Most of the Malaysian migrant workers are already living in overcrowded accommodations. In addition to dormitories, some may live on the upper floors of construction sites, in shipping containers or other temporary housing on work sites, in some cases with cramped room housing up to 30 men, no air conditioning or appropriate ventilation, and often just one toilet shared by up to 80 people or more. Due to poor, dense living condition in worker dormitories, it increased the risk of infection of COVID-19 among them. It is caused by the very bad condition of the accommodation, where the workers were being packed into a very small and unhygienic place where the germ and viruses can spread easily. It was reported that 91.1% of foreign workers in Malaysia are not provided with suitable accommodation that has been prescribed in Workers' Minimum Standards of Housing and Amenities Act 1990.
Kerja apa bos?
Kerja bangunan.
Kontraktor. Bos, syarikat ada sediakan tempat tinggal tak? Rumah?
Ada lah, rumah kongsi.
Apa?
Kongsi.
Rumah kongsi. Macam mana dekat rumah kongsi tu? Macam mana suasana?
Suasana ya sama lah, air ada, api ada.
Air
boleh,
ada, api
boleh
ada.
tinggal lah.
Selesa lah. Kalau dekat rumah kongsi tu ada rosak, bos ada buat apa-apa tak?
Ada lah, dia beli bahan, nanti kita repair sendiri lah.
In 2020, the media reported on the issue of the poor safety and health conditions at the workers' accommodation in the well-known rubber glove industry, Top Glove. One of the clusters of COVID-19 has been detected in Kuala Lumpur, which is Teratai cluster, which was associated with the workers' accommodation. It was reported that the company did not impose physical distancing as advised by the government, and workers were housed in unhygienic workers' dormitories. A Bangladesh supervisor in the rubber glove factories told the international media that he lived in a dormitory with 29 other roommates with only 2 bathrooms and no air condition, while the fan did a poor job keeping them cool. In addition to the insufficient amount of bathrooms, the water often runs short during peak hours. Thus, this really affects the ability to maintain the hygiene among the roommates, which caused the increased risk of COVID-19 infection. In conjunction with this issue, the Defence Minister, Dato' Sri Ismail Sabri, announced that authorities will start enforcing the new worker housing rules. Act 446, Workers' Minimum Standards of Housing and Amenities Act 1990, was passed into law in July 2019 and to effect in September 2020, that extend the employee housing standards that were were only applied to mine and plantation employers. The act includes the minimum dorm space per worker.
Before the Recovery Movement Control Order was introduced on 10 June 2020, migrant workers have experienced being instructed to stop working by their employers in accordance with the SOP in effect. Meanwhile, between the first Movement Control Order on 18 March 2020 and the Conditional Movement Control Order on 9 June 2020, most of the workers, including migrants, working as daily wage earners were not allowed to work since certain economic sectors were banned from operating and only production of essential needs was allowed. Indeed, the majority of the workers in these sectors are migrant workers, and they have been coerced to work overtime but been paid with low wages. After the migrant workers clusters existed, the government of Malaysia provided free treatment of COVID-19 as one of the obligation to the migrant workers, but most of them are scared to show up because they don't want to be arrested and been sent to the detention center, just what had happened during the raid on 1st May 2020. The situation became worse after the government shrank the employment scope of migrant workers in certain sectors to provide the job opportunities to the locals only. Some were allowed to work for a certain number of days a month, while others were not allowed to work at all and did not receive any income for months. For migrant workers who are permitted to work and being paid on an hourly basis, the lesser hours of working have been reducing their monthly income greatly.
Based on a few interviews with the migrant workers held by some researchers, an Indonesian worker stated that MCO has badly impacted his monthly income. Before the pandemic, he earned RM 1,300 a month at the very least and was able to set aside at least RM 500 a month to Indonesia. He has been unemployed for 3 to 4 months and had to borrow money from his friends in order to survive. Another migrant worker said that although he was still allowed to work, there were limitations he needed to obey. He also declared that his income satisfies the minimum wage of RM 1050 till 1100, and it is impossible to earn the minimum wage if he only worked for 4 hours every day for less than 4 days a week. The employer did not top up the earned payment to ensure the worker received their minimum wage. Even though the government came out with an economic plan to help the society to cope with the pandemic, it does not include the migrant workers. Instead, the responsible NGOs to give assistance to the migrant workers were also cancelled because of information lacking about their recent whereabouts. Their welfare is left neglected. With the fear of the authorities and less money, migrant workers don't have the chance to receive good information of COVID-19, such as the swab test and antigen rapid test kit, especially for those who are infected.
The pandemic revealed the precariousness and vulnerabilities of migrant workers, whether from being excluded or from the unintended consequences of the government responses in the fight against the pandemic. The issue does not only happen in Malaysia. It was reported that Nepal, which has 2.5 million workers in India, saw 500,000 workers return from India due to the pandemic. Meanwhile, the Indian government is engaging in one of the largest repatriation efforts ever, bringing back over 100,000 Indian workers from different regions through flight, while many more have returned on their own. In short, government should resolve the issue of migrant workers in order to ensure their right and well-being are protected, as they will play a vital role in the reopening of the economy. Will this pandemic end soon so as the misery of the migrant workers?